Thank you for the introduction. Thank you guys for coming. I know it's tough. It's lunchtime. If I were you, I won't be here. I'll probably be outside eating. So today, I'm going to discuss demystifying a malware attack. But before we go into the meat of things, I'd like to talk about myself. So currently, I'm the principal malware scientist at RSA. I also run a team of malware intelligence researchers in RSA First Watch. And before I joined RSA, I was with Dambala, F-Secure, and Trend Micro. Trend Micro is where I started my career. So when they were hiring me, they didn't send me an email, they sent me a telegram. So that's how long it was. Hotmail was pretty new during that time, so nobody uses it that much. And you can follow me at Twitter, Tops. If you have questions or think of any questions after my talk, please feel free to ask me via Twitter. If it's easy, I'll reply. But if it's really, really hard, I'll eventually reply. And I wrote 2 books, Malware Rootkits and Botnets and Advanced Malware Analysis. So if you have budget for books, please get a copy. All royalties go straight to my 2 kids' 529 college fund. And trust me, these books, they make a great holiday gift. It will make your holidays great again and your family relationships stronger together. And I co-authored 1 book, which is coming out in December. So again, if you have budget, please feel free to grab a copy. So today, we're going to talk about the news, behind the scenes, and lessons learned. The news. So every day we see things happening. Like in the past, like 10 years ago, you would see outbreak here, outbreak there. And recently, you'll see in the news companies being hacked, being compromised. And lately, you would see IoT devices being used for DDoS attacks. We see what is being sensationalized by the media, but there's nothing wrong with that. It's usually what makes us read those news articles. But there's something happening behind it that is really, really important for us to understand, especially if you're curious about security, if you're a student or just starting out being a security researcher. It's always good to understand what's going on in the background. So hopefully today, I will get to impart some knowledge on what's happening behind the scenes. And for you to find out what's happening behind the scenes, there's so much research work that has gone into it. Usually, this is how exciting the work is. So I remember one time, a reporter wanted to interview me about what I do every day in my job. And I think this was the time when a new James Bond movie came out, wherein they were tracking down a hacker, and there was this very big screen. And I think it was Q, or one of the technical guys in James Bond. He was moving stuff around, and he was saying, oh, this computer's being hacked, this computer's being hacked. So I think the reporter had that idea that that's what we do. So he came to our office, he interviewed me, and then he told me, can you show me how you do stuff? So I sat down, I turned on my PCs, and then turned on another PC which has the source code, and another PC which has the malware running in it. And he saw this. And I told him, yeah, this is what I do every day. I just sit down, look at bits and pieces, look at the assembly code. And if I get excited, I write it down on paper, and then that's it. So it was an eye-opener for him. But now I think it's totally different. Because of Mr. Robot, even my kids now want to become a researcher like me, which is good. So when you research stuff in the background, you find out more than just what the malware is doing. You find out that malware is just a tool. Unlike before, during the early days, the malware is the big thing. If you get infected by malware, you catch the malware, that's it. Now it's just a tool. You can actually recycle malware. And it's not the main thing anymore in an attack campaign. And talking about campaigns, we all know there are two types. We have the opportunistic and we have targeted attacks. Now, opportunistic is what we usually hear in the news. Like there's 10 million infections of this malware, or there's a DDoS attack here, there's a DDoS attack there. But what we seldom hear are targeted attacks. Those attacks are geared towards roles in a company or a specific person within a company. That's why when it comes to targeted attacks, when I advise people or C-level executives, I always talk to their family members as well, and not just the person themselves. Like for an example, let's say we have CEO A, and CEO A is here right now in LASCON. She's attending a conference. And one of her kids tweeted out something like, hey, you know what, my mom is somewhere in Austin in this conference that I have no idea, so party at my house tonight. So if I'm an attacker, that's gold for me. That's very good information. Because what I can do is that I can take that information and design a spear phishing attack against the CEO. I can send that CEO an email saying, thank you for attending LASCON. We have some gift for you. Just click on this link. Or your picture files are located in this app or executable that's included in this email. Please feel free to open it. Now, of course, if the CEO is tech-savvy enough, which, of course, all of them are, they would say, you know what, this is a scam. I'll just forward this to my SOC or to our security vendor, security provider, so they can investigate this further. But then, what the attackers would do is that they would just send them a regular mail. So that regular mail, usually people believe regular mail more than email because it's physical, it's something they can touch. Then that regular mail could contain a certificate, a really nice certificate that says, thank you for attending this conference. There's a USB stick inside it. Plug it into your computer. You'll get to see pictures and videos of the presentations. And some people actually do that, which is sad. And when I was living in California, there are lots of campaigns, especially during concerts, wherein if they know a C-level executive is attending that concert, because they follow that C-level executive or that researcher's social media or IT person's social media, and then they know, oh, you know what, this person is going to attend this concert tonight, a Drake concert. And then they would target that person. They would be in the entrance where that person would come in or the exit where that person would come out. And then they would give out free CDs or USB sticks, like, thank you for attending the concert. No, if you have an ID that says concert staff and a concert shirt, nobody will verify that, do you really work for the band or for the venue? You just take the free stuff they're giving away. And most people get victimized by that. But regardless whether it's an opportunistic or a targeted attack, everything's the same. It's similar. So the infrastructure that supports the attack, the people behind the attack, it's almost the same. Same technology, same roles. Like here, it's hard to tell the difference, right? Whether it's Big Bird or Queen Elizabeth. So what's going on behind the scenes? So the thing about researching malware now is you don't only reverse malware and understand what's going on with the malware. You also need to research the infrastructure that's supporting it. And this is the most common infrastructure that we see in our research. So first thing, we have the deployment technology. So a deployment technology is also known as an attack vector. It could be an email, drive-by download site, USB sticks, or anything, any technology that would have the malware from the attacker to the target, anything that would deliver the malware to the target. So usually a deployment technology would contain a malware installer. So a malware installer, it's a typical software installer So that's why when you run something, it disappears on your desktop or it disappears in your system. Chances are it's a malware installer. Now there are two types of malware installer. Actually, there's three types. You have the dropper, downloader, and the hybrid. So a dropper is a malware installer that contains the malware itself. It contains the malware in it. So usually it's like 3 megs or more in terms of size. A malware installer downloader, it's only like 300 KB or even less. Because what it does is that it connects to a network domain or network resource, and then it downloads the malware from there. So it's like a typical software installer. Anyway, malware is software anyway. So most of the features that you see in typical software, chances are you'll see it in malware. Now the hybrid, it's a combination. So what it first tries to do is it checks for updates before installation. And then if there are no updates, like let's say it victimized a laptop and it's running already, and then that laptop is not connected to the internet. So what it will do is that it will install the malware that's contained in it. So that's what a hybrid does. Now the thing about malware installers is that it's being provided by a different group of attackers. Usually they sell this. They would say, do you remember the malware that was spread out during Christmas holiday? Our malware installer is responsible for that. So if you want us to deploy your malware or to install your malware in the same way, pay us the money and we'll take care of it for you. That's why there's this term in the industry, first stage, second stage, third stage of infection. Actually, the first stage is more about the malware installer itself. So if you just capture the first stage, chances are you just captured the malware installer. You haven't gotten the malware itself. So this one, assuming this is a downloader, so it would check first for updates in a network resource, which is known as a malware serving domain. So a malware serving domain is a network resource. It could be a domain, it could be an IP that contains the updated malware file and also other components of the malware that's needed for the attack campaign. Now if it's present, if it's there, then it will continue with the installation. So the thing about here is that the attackers made all of these technologies modular, so that if somebody is able to capture the malware installer and they don't want their malware to be reversed, they just cut the connection to the malware serving domain. So there will be reports of saying there's this outbreak, this is what it does, but it's actually just describing the malware installer. It's not describing the malware itself because they have already cut connection to the malware serving domain. So the researchers won't be able to get any malware samples. Now let's say it's there. It has the updates, so it would continue installing the malware. So when it comes to installation, before an infection, there's only one file. So when you capture that file, you can understand clearly what that malware does because everything is in that file. But most infection nowadays, it's composed of different components. So up to 10 components, even more. So just capturing one file will not tell you the whole story, and you will not really understand what the malware does. So these are the most common components. You have the configuration file, you have the attack component, regeneration component, rootkit, and then the bot agent. So the configuration file, this is how you control the malware. If it's used for a DDoS attack, you could put all the targets there. If it's used for banking information stealing, you could put the target banks there. So anything that will make you control the malware itself. Now the attack component, that's the component that decides what the malware is. So if it's going to be used for DDoS attack, you'll see there the DDoS routine. If it's information stealing, you'll see the routine there. If it's a Trojan or a backdoor, you'll see those functionalities in the attack component. The regeneration component, I also call this the Horcrux component. So if you're familiar with Harry Potter, so I was in kindergarten when the first movie came out. So it's like me growing up with Harry Potter, so I had a lot of influence. So regeneration component, it's a set of different files located in your computer or in a target machine, wherein it checks for the presence of other components. If it's not there, it tries to recreate it. If it's located in the machine itself, but if it's not there, it connects to the malware serving domain and then tries to download all of those components again. This is why some people would say, you know what, we captured the malware, but they only captured the attack component. They're able to understand what's going on, and then they would say, you know what, we already have a solution for this, let's deploy it. But then the next day, they look at their logs, and they're saying, there's still some information going out of our machine. That's because they just deployed a solution for the attack component, and then the regeneration component saw that it's not there anymore, so it downloaded an update from the malware serving domain, which is totally different from the attack component that they got. So later I'll show you how easy it is for them to create malware. The rootkit component is the component that hides the malware from the system. Now, if the malware is designed to have to be a backdoor or to have continuous presence or a foothold in the system, this is a very important component. But if it's like a hit and run attack, so a hit and run attack, sometimes it just needs a couple of minutes in your system. Sometimes the rootkit component is not needed anymore. And there are instances wherein the malware is not encrypted if it's only a hit and run attack. The bot agent. The bot agent is the one that communicates. It has it's the module or the functionality that communicates to the CNC and malware serving domain or any other network resource that the attacker uses to control a target machine. And from time to time, the malware components, it checks for updates. And then if there are updates, it downloads it to the target system. So as I've mentioned, one of the most popular network resource is the command and control. It sends updates. The malware sends updates to that channel. And it also receives commands from the command and control. So there are certain malware wherein there are no configuration file. It gets commands directly from the command and control. Now, the advantage of having a configuration file there is that if it's offline, it can still function. And most of the time, if they're trying to target a C-level executive, they understand that laptops sometimes go offline, especially if that person is traveling. So their malware that's present in that system has to be able to function even if the laptop is offline. And we also have another network resource which is called the drop zone. So this is the network resource that malware uses to drop stolen information. Now, in the early days of spyware, you just need a hard disk, but then you have to have physical access to the computer. So if you want to spy on your spouse, your kids, in the early days, you just install spyware. I don't do that. So, and so attackers understand that it really doesn't make sense if you want to remotely steal something from a target PC. There has to be a capability for them to get that stolen data without physically accessing the target machine. So the first thing they thought of is email. So before, they get emails of bits and pieces of data, and then they just recreate it on their own, on their end, and then that's the stolen information. But then they realize it's easy to detect. So what they did is that they use domains or IPs as their drop zone, which is much more easier for them because they can have their own UI. They can recreate the stolen data very quickly. They can decrypt it. It's very easy for them. So this is the most common attack infrastructure when it comes to malware to an attack campaign. So if you have security vendors and you ask them to analyze malware for you, and then they give it back to you and say, these are the network resources that it connects to. You should always ask them, how are those network resources being used? Because sometimes you always hear it connects to this CNC, CNC this, CNC that. Then they give you a list of domains and all that. And sometimes they're not really used for CNC. Sometimes they're used for malware serving domains, which is good because you could just go straight there and get all the files, and then you could analyze all of the future malware that they plan to deploy. And when you're infected or when you're under attack and somebody goes into your company, an incident response team, you should always ask them, the malware that attack us, is it a single file or is it made up of different components? If it's made up of different components, were you able to get all of those components? And you also need to ask them, how did it get into my system? How was it deployed? Was it through email? Of course, if you only have one component, it's hard to answer that question. That's why sometimes if there's a very popular attack that happened and you hear it in the media, sometimes it takes 3-6 months for you to get a full report, because that's how long it takes to reverse the malware and also to understand the different components that's supporting it. Now, the good thing about this also is that once you understand this, you could gear your solution towards stopping all of this. Like, you can have a solution that makes sure no stolen information is going out of your company, or something that prevents malware from communicating to known CNC sites, and something that prevents malware from downloading something from unknown or unverified sites. So of course, with all of this technology, this will not work without people behind them. So we have the attackers themselves. The main one is a sponsor. So the sponsor is the one that actually pays for the service. So it could be a government, a commercial organization, non-commercial organization, any entity that has a stake on something. So for example, if Russia wants to influence an election, that's what they're saying in the media, they could be called a sponsor. And then they hire a group of attackers to get what they want. And then once they have that information, they can use it for whatever purpose they want. And usually, a sponsor doesn't have contact with other people that own the technology of the attack infrastructure that I just described. So there's a middleman, which I call the crime boss. So usually, he's the one who has access to the technical owners of the attack infrastructure. He's like the agent. He can also be a sponsor, especially if it's a government sponsor. If it's a government-sponsored attack team that's highly funded, you don't really need the crime boss, because the government itself, that government itself controls everything. So the crime boss sets up between, is the middleman between the sponsor and the technology owners of the attack infrastructure. So who are the technology owners? They're the malware writers. So they create malware, and they also create DIY kits. So before, when they deal with each other, a malware writer would write a specific malware for that sponsor or for that attack. But then, because of some arrests and some of the investigation that's going on, they learn their lesson. So they have additional buffers when it comes to contacting sponsors or the middleman, the crime bosses. So instead of them writing specifically a malware for that attack, they're now making DIY kits. And then they give you a special key or a special license that would unlock a certain functionality in that DIY kit. Now, DIY kits are not new. They've been around for a long time. So the earliest one that I remember is VCL. I think it was created by a 15-year-old kid way back late 80s, early 90s. But before, most of the DIY kits, it's just for fun. They just want to show your technical capabilities. So you know what? I'll create a DIY kit so you can create your malware even without knowledge of how to code. But now DIY kits nowadays, it's much more dangerous. Plus, if you want to buy it, usually it's like $4,000, $7,000 a pop. And the business is so, I would say, robust that they're competing with each other. So most of them, they hack each other, and then once they hack each other, some of them use Dropboxes and other web sharing applications. Once they hack somebody, they would just post all of their source code, and then nobody will buy that kit anymore because they would say, you know what, your source code is already out there. Researchers can already nitpick what they need to understand in your source code, so I won't buy it anymore. So it's a double-edged sword because it helps us. But then again, an aspiring malware author can just get that source code, improve on it, and then create his own DIY kit and then sell it again. So another technology provider is a deployment provider. So this one specializes on distribution network. So it also has 24/7 support. So this one, usually he's the one who owns the attack vector, the email, the drive-by, USB sticks. And they're the ones who designs how to attract victims. They could use Facebook, they could use Twitter, and all that. They're the ones in charge of deploying the malware to the target. And then, of course, we have the botnet master. Now, the botnet master is the one that controls a whole botnet. So the thing about botnet masters is that if you're an attacker and you want real-time status on your infection and you don't have that capability, you can go to a bot master and say, you know what, I need that capability. Can you help me? And then the botnet master will just say, okay, this bot agent, just bake it inside your malware, and it will communicate to the servers that I control, and then I could give you credentials for that, then you can log in, and then you can see what's going on. And we also have the resilience provider. This one, it provides CNC. Most of the network resources that an attacker needs, this guy provides it. And one thing we need to understand here is that it provides bulletproof hosting. So it means that it's hard to take down because they really don't care. Like if the servers are located here in the US, they could easily be arrested for hosting stolen data or hosting malware for the purpose of distributing it. But most of these servers are located in countries wherein they really don't care or don't have rules against it. And most of these owners, they say, it's like, you know what, you can use my server, you just pay me money, I really don't care what you do with them. And this is actually why sometimes you see we took down this CNC botnet, we took them down. You just took down one domain or one server. But actually, it's very easy to pop up. It will pop up again like after a week or so, and there's no more heat or no more attention is being given to that botnet. And then we also have the botnet operator. So the botnet operators, like what I described earlier, wherein if you just want a slice of the botnet itself, you get the credentials, and then you could just rent a slice of the botnet pie. Like let's say, for example, you know what? There's this favorite kid that I really like, a contestant in The Voice. I want to make sure that kid wins. So if you're really, really motivated, you could just get a slice of the botnet, have all of those machines vote, and then all of them would be counted. Or you could have an ad, a legitimate ad, that you get paid 1 cent a click. And then you could tell this person, you know what, let's split it. I have this ad. If somebody clicks on it, I get 1 cent. I just need 1 million clicks, and then we'll split it. So 1 million, 1 cent, $10,000. Or it could be easily 2 million clicks, 3 million, 4 million. Or if you just want to attack somebody via DDoS, you can also do this. Now, the way I describe them is how they operate individually. But if they're organized in a way, when all of them work together, sometimes if it's a big project and if it's a highly funded attack, they would offer their services exclusively for that sponsor. And most sponsors, they would say, you know what, I'll contract you for a year, I'll give you this money, don't do anything else, just concentrate on this. Now, you'll see how they work in different chat channels and underground attacker websites. But sometimes you also see them talking in pastebin. So there are pages in pastebin wherein they communicate in plain sight. Sometimes it's gibberish, so they have their own decryption code on what's there, and then they decrypt it, and then they read the message. Or for those that are starting out, they would put their ad there, like let's say I provide this service, pay me this in Bitcoins, contact me, this is my ICQ number or my chat profile, just contact me, this is my Facebook page. So if you have time later, just go to pastebin and Google like attack services, deployment services, malware services, and you'll see different kinds of stuff in pastebin. And of course, we have the money mules, very common. But you know what? Sometimes you can't blame them because the emails they get and the websites they visit, it looks legit. And there are people actually calling them to say, hey, we're in need of a finance manager. It's work from home. If you're a parent, it won't affect your schedule with your kids. You just need to process payments, and then you get to keep 5, 10%. If it's this big, you get to keep 15%. And you can't blame those people, especially if they need a job. So before, when there's an investigation, those people tend to be arrested because they're part of the crime. But law enforcement now understand that it's not really their fault. They're also a victim. So most of the time, they're not really put in jail. They're just interrogated. They're asked, okay, how did you come about becoming an employee for XYZ company? What techniques do they use? So the investigation now is more about understanding how they got duped instead of people arresting them because they were part of a fraudulent operation. So these are the most common tools that attackers use: DIY kits and armoring tools. So there are lots of tools out there when it comes to malware technology, but these are the most common, especially when we're talking about malware. Because we have to understand that malware is just a tool in an attack campaign. Unlike before, it's the beginning and end of an attack. Now it's just a tool. So if there's an existing malware out there that has the functionality they need, they just use these tools to improve that malware, especially the armoring tools. So DIY kits, most common one, Zeus. We also have SpyEye. Lots of more tools that are available out there. Sometimes you have to buy them for thousands of dollars. Some of the tools are custom made for a certain sponsor or a certain entity that has a stake on an attack campaign. Like, I really like this one because this one that says, are you infected by SpyEye? So it's really good because when you try this one out, if you're infected, you try this one out, it actually detects it and removes it. So if you want to come up with a solution for SpyEye, you don't need to reverse the malware itself. You just need to reverse the DIY kits. So
you have to pay for it though?
before, but now it's you can just Google it. And there are some companies that actually have budgets for this, wherein there's people monitoring what's going on, and then if there's a tool offering, you snag it, and then you use it for research. So this is why when somebody asks me, if I want to go into reverse engineering, what do? I always tell them not to spend too much time reversing individual samples, but spend most of your time reversing DIY kits instead. Because it will make you understand more what the malware is. Plus, you will not be duped into saying the first generation of this kit and the second generation of this kit are totally different family. Because most of these kits, when they produce malware, it looks different in form and in memory. So if you're not familiar enough with the kits, you might say, you know what, this is a totally different malware. But when in fact, it's just the same. So that's why when we see stats that's saying we just found 100 million malware a year, or 55,000 unique malware samples a day, those stats are true. But what's not being mentioned is that, so out of those 10 million or 100 million malware samples that you see a year, how many are those were made by kits, or how many of those were custom made, or like boutique malware? So it's hard to say. But once you have an understanding of the kits, you can improve that report and say, we saw 100 million samples last year, and those 100 million samples, there are 10 kits that are responsible for those 100 million samples. So if you're a researcher, you could say, you know what, I could just concentrate my time reversing those 10 kits instead of understanding those 100 million malware samples.
Does each kit have like a style of some sort?
Oh, the kits?
Yeah, the kits.
Yeah. So they have their own functionality and how to build it. So they could build infinite amount of malware samples because they use time as a key. So as long as time exists, it will create a unique malware sample. Now, I'm standing here and saying just reverse the DIY kits, but in reality, it's easier said than done. So it might take you months to reverse one, even if you're really, really experienced. And sometimes you need the help of other researchers. That's how challenging this is. If the malware they create is protected, this is much more protected. Now you get a break if somebody releases the source code. Because if somebody releases the source code, you could also understand the protection mechanisms that they employ, and chances are those same protective mechanisms that you see in that source code, it's being applied also by other DIY kits. So it helps you a lot. And we have armoring tools. These are the most common ones. Some people just sell this $10 a pop, $5 a pop, and there's people actually buying them. And sometimes they work, sometimes they don't work. Like for this one, it has anti-debugger capability, compressed resources. So when you try them out and you check all of those options, sometimes you'll say, you know what? It didn't really compress any of the resources, or it didn't really encrypt anything, it just added garbage code. But of course, for the normal buyer of these tools, they really don't check. But of course, if all of this works, it's a big, big challenge for the reverse engineers and for the researchers to understand the malware. Because before you get to the code of the malware, you have to break the protective mechanisms that's being employed in the malware. So as I've mentioned before, most of the attackers, they're more concerned about the functionality of the malware, and they just use tools to protect that malware, and then they could deploy it in an attack again. I had this talk, I think 2-3 years ago. I call it green malware, made from 100% recycled malware. Because people would come to me and say, you know what, I just found a very sophisticated malware. It bypassed all of our security mechanisms. And when you spend time on it, you realize, you know what, it's not really new. It's like 5 years old. They just gone through some armoring tools, That's why it was able to bypass some of the security products that they have in their network. So this is a malware factory. It's an automated system that will create malware for you. This is in real time. This is happening right now live from Atlanta. So the thing here is that you can just leave this machine. And this one, I just use Zeus since it's easier to deploy. And if you look at the lower right, it would create the number of malware samples. So you can go out, watch a movie, vote, or do whatever. You come back, you'll have hundreds of malware. You can go out, get a drink, get arrested, come back the next day, you'll have 10,000 malware samples. And when I say malware samples, it's unique in a way that it doesn't look similar when you look at it on disk, and also when it's loaded in memory, it looks totally different. So for the untrained eye, they would just say, "Oh, this is a new malware family," but in fact, it just came from one kit. This is why it's easy for malware writers or for the attackers to rotate malware in a machine. Like they could have an infection there, and then they would say, "You know what? Every hour, let's update it. Let's update that malware." So if somebody goes into that company, gets that whole set of components, deploy a solution 2, 3, 4, 5 hours later, those malware that were analyzed, they don't exist in the system anymore, because the attackers probably would have updated the malware components and the malware itself in that system, because they have all of these malware samples in their hands that they can use. Now, if you're a small-time crook, you're not part of a very sophisticated group, you could just sell each sample online for like a cent. Like I can sell you unique samples for 1 cent. So if you could create 1 million, 1 cent, that's like 10 grand for you. And there are people that buy them, especially disgruntled employees. They say, I'm resigning from my company, or I know I'm going to get fired. So I want to have a bomb there wherein if they ask me to stand up from my desk, I'll just execute it before they could. Yeah, and then it gets deployed in the company's system. So this one is the same thing, but this one uses an armoring tool. So the armoring tool itself, it also creates different generations of malware. So imagine this: you have one malware from a DIY kit. You subject it to an armoring tool. Different armoring tools. You have totally different malware, and it actually messes things up. Even if you have the most sophisticated heuristics, it will mess things up. And this is usually what's used for recycling malware. You just need to have one malware sample, and then it can create different generations of it. And then you can have different variations. You could use different kinds of tools. You can combine them. Now it's easy because most of the targets have lots of memory, lots of computing power. Unlike before, during the DOS days, Windows 95, Windows 98, Windows XP days, wherein the memory is not that large, malware tends to hang. That's why when you look at the history of malware, there are lots of malware that in the name itself, you'll see damaged or you'll see intended. If you see damaged or intended in the name of a malware, it means those are malware samples that don't run anymore because probably they take up too much memory, or the tools itself messed up the functionality of the malware that's not working anymore. So lessons learned. So we need to look at the whole picture. So if you want to research an attack campaign, don't just concentrate on the malware itself. You also need to concentrate on the infrastructure. So you need to understand also the different roles that required to support the infrastructure, because sometimes there are cases wherein most of the people there, or most of the people behind the attack infrastructure, some of them, they just recycle things. So if you understand one infrastructure, then you could say, you know what, this attack is the same thing. We could stop it the same way because it's the same group of attackers or threat actors that did it. And you also need to understand the target and roles of the people that's being attacked. Like C-level executives, researchers, IT staff, they have access to tier 1 networks. Now, nobody would attack a front desk personnel because they know that the computer that the front desk uses probably don't have access to tier 1 network. But if it does, the first thing they would attack is the front desk personnel. And we collaborate. It's hard, but we collaborate. Technical, we do our research, scientific approach, knowledge sharing. And on the legal part, we work with law enforcement officers. We share evidence so that most LEOs, they have a database of different attributes for threat actors. So sometimes if we provide them evidence, they would say, hey, you know what? This is the threat actor that's related to that. And it gives us an understanding. It also helps them in their investigation. And that's it. So again, thank you. Buy my book, great holiday gift. Twitter, Facebook. The last time I updated it, I think like a year ago, but I love Facebook. And LinkedIn, if you want to link up. So most of this malware, they use home users as their CNC also, and as their malware serving domains. Yep. So like for us here, I don't turn my PC off at home. It's always on. And there's a malware family, I forgot, but they use home users as their CNC. So they rotate it. So when you analyze that malware, you know what? It's connecting to different IP addresses. But then when you look at it, hey, you know what? These are all IP addresses of customers from this service provider located in Austin. And then the next day, it's a totally different group. Probably it's located in Atlanta, located in California. So they rotate. Yep. And it's hard to detect. So those users, they're used for CNC, and those users are the ones that connect to the mothership. And the mothership is the one that's located in countries elsewhere. Because most home users, they don't have that capability to say, you know what, I don't want to connect to China, or I don't want to connect to, I mean China. I don't want to connect to, yeah, exactly. All right, I think that's it. Thank you guys, thank you for coming.